Operation Joint Sword 2024B. That sounds ominous. This is Rogue Insights. My name is Kevin Duska. Please drop us a like, subscribe, follow, drop a comment. We love you. So today, China held this exercise, in fact, Joint Sword 2024B, around the coast of Taiwan. And this is, for all intents and purposes, a military exercise to test China's military strength, but also to project power and to demonstrate the type of blockade of Taiwan that China could launch. As it currently stands, China does not have the most powerful navy in the world, but it does have the largest navy in the world. China's fleet has undergone an absolutely massive expansion. And in 2023, China's fleet surpassed that of the United States when it reached 350 ships in comparison to the U.S. Navy's 293. Again, the U.S. Navy has a qualitative advantage in ships, weapons systems, and aircraft, but China has been backfilling in terms of aircraft carriers, destroyers, submarines, and various amphibious assault ships, which are all key assets for projecting power, notably against Taiwan. The two main active carriers that China can currently put forth are the Liaoning and the Shandong. A third, the Fujian, should be fully operational relatively soon. And these are kind of critical or pivotal for China to project power in its area of operations, which is mostly the South China Sea for reasons we'll get into in a little bit, but also in the Taiwan Strait. And the fact that the Liaoning participated in Operation Joint Sword demonstrates the importance, which is growing, of carrier strike groups in Chinese naval operations. China has also massively invested in nuclear-powered and diesel-electric submarines alike. This massively bolsters its capacity to defend its coastlines and to launch attacks in the open sea. This is a potent anti-access area denial, A2AD, strategy that is aimed at U.S. naval forces. If we go back 10, 15 years ago when I was in graduate school doing my PhD, there's all this talk about the carrier killer missile, that China had basically launched these kind of like ICBM sort of missiles that they could launch at carriers and blow them the hell up as area denial weapons. China has evolved from that and is now using actual naval platforms to do that. China is also pioneering, domestically speaking anyway, with the J-15 fighter, which has conducted many takeoff and landing drills in recent exercises, and that's showcasing that China is making progress in naval aviation. It is far behind the United States, England, etc., France, but it is making progress. There's also its anti-ship ballistic missiles, the DF-21D, the DF-26. These are what I was talking about a bit earlier, but they've also been developed. They allow for the targeting of U.S. carriers and capital ships from long distances and do represent another critical area denial capability for China. But China's most critical objective, and this is being seen in all of its activity, but also in the context of this exercise around Taiwan, is to challenge U.S. dominance in the region, in the Indo-Pacific. China has an ambition of becoming the global maritime power by 2049, which is going to be the 100-year anniversary of the PRC, and of securing sea lanes, notably the South China Sea, through which about 30% of global maritime trade passes. Now, I want us to look at something on this map right here. If we're looking at the location of Chinese principal naval bases, Xiaopingdao and other bases, we do see that China faces a ton of choke points. For example, Japan, South Korea, where the United States has significant strategic assets down here in Okinawa, and here's Taiwan. So China kind of has every incentive to open up a pathway from the East China Sea to the South China Sea to kind of get around these. For the sole fact that there is this possibility to kind of blockade it there, whilst getting out through the South China Sea is a far more viable proposition. So exercises like Joint Sword are not isolated events, but they're part of China's broader military buildup, and they're oriented towards basically showing force to Taiwan and to the neighboring region within China's very assertive territorial policy. They simulate blockades, amphibious assaults, neutralization of key ports, all critical elements of any future invasion of Taiwan. So now let's look at Taiwan as a national priority for China. The PRC, China, has long considered Taiwan to be a breakaway province, legitimate natural Chinese territory. And although Taiwan operates as a self-governing democratic entity with its own government, military, and foreign policy, Beijing has a one China policy, and Taiwan is part of it. So according to Xi Jinping, reunification is a priority. Taiwan is just, this errant cousin who has veered away from the righteous glory of the Chinese. Taiwan, on the other hand, basically rejects these claims by Beijing, emphasizing its independence and sovereignty. If you look at what Taiwanese President Lai Ching-te has said recently, and this has pissed Beijing off, stated, quote unquote, Taiwan and China are not subordinate to each other, and this is perceived as a direct challenge to Chinese territorial integrity by Xi Jinping because it challenges him both in front of a global audience and a domestic audience. So the PLA and the People Liberation Navy do have strategic plans in place for Taiwan. I'm not saying war is going to occur anytime soon. Some pundits think that it will. I don't, but who knows? But these exercises are basically to test the PLA and PLN's capabilities to carry out this blockade or invasion of Taiwan. Taiwan is not very far from the Chinese mainland, as we know. So basically, Chinese forces move in, encircle Taiwan, they control the surrounding waters, they conduct strikes on key military and civilian targets to shape the battlefield, and this blockade scenario is kind of oriented towards starving the Taiwanese out, pending the arrival of support from the U.S. So now if we look at the positioning of Chinese assets today, and we're seeing these red boxes where they were positioned, we are seeing a large number of concentrations that would be conducive to such a blockade. We're also seeing the position of the Liaoning carrier group, which was positioned to the southeast of Taiwan, and which was coordinating air sorties around the predominantly the eastern side. And I'm assuming most of these western ones, we're seeing 18 down here, 23, 5 to the north. Yeah, so I think we're seeing these 22 aircraft launches that coming from Liaoning, and the others were likely, that would be 23 plus 18, 41, 45 of them coming from shore, which is well within operational range. So this basically demonstrates for China and for the world that it's capable of engaging in joint operations, which are critical to modern warfare. It can integrate its Navy, its Air Force, its Rocket Force, and its Coast Guard into one to practice overwhelming Taiwan's defense, cutting its access off from reinforcements from the U.S. and Japan. And China's basically saying to the world, hey, look, we can do this whenever we want to. And this is part of a broader pattern where China has been signaling its willingness to potentially attack Taiwan in the future alongside other gray zone tactics where it's been applying sustained and low intensity pressure on Taiwan, short of provoking outright war. So daily airspace incursions, naval patrols that go into Taiwan's EEZ, and large-scale military drills like this, which are kind of foreboding in terms of what they involve. Now, Taiwan does have an asymmetric warfare capability that is designed to defend against a larger technologically superior force like China, notably through the use of smaller mobile units with high-impact weapons, anti-ship missiles, mines, and cyber warfare techniques. In other words, it has a basically China-oriented defense policy, but its primary security guarantee comes from the United States. And as I said, as it currently stands, if we compare the U.S. fleet to the Chinese fleet, I mean, there's no comparison, right? 2 active aircraft carriers, the United States has like 12. But if we compare the Chinese fleet to the English fleet, we are seeing the massive growth of a new naval superpower. The Chinese Navy has grown so significantly over recent years that it is the largest Navy in the world, but potentially the second most powerful. And this is problematic because the U.S. military has historically engaged in deterrence through the forward deployment of U.S. carrier strike groups and engaging in freedom of navigation operations. in the region. But as China rises and the U.S. either stagnates or declines, Taiwan is kind of the epicenter of great power competition between China and the U.S. And for Beijing, securing Taiwan would basically cement its regional dominance and basically show that the U.S. is no longer relevant in Asia. Taiwan, for the U.S., is a critical democratic ally in the Indo-Pacific. It's a critical link in the first island chain, a network of U.S.-friendly nations that are basically designed to contain the Chinese Navy. And exercises like Joint Sword are kind of a reminder that China is testing its readiness for this potential, eventual, likely military confrontation with Taiwan, which will draw the United States in and cause who knows what. But this all ties back to the U.S. China rivalry, which has been intensifying across military, economic, technological, diplomatic, and other domains. And while the U.S. continues to maintain significant influence through its global alliance structure and its military presence, notably in the Indo-Pacific, allies like Japan, Singapore, South Korea, the Philippines, etc., China has been building its own power projection capabilities and via the Belt and Road Initiative has been building its own alliance structure. And while the Belt and Road Initiative has not yet fully taken off in the Indo-Pacific, China is increasingly capable of counterbalancing the freedom of navigation operations that the U.S. historically took and of messing with U.S. allies like the Filipino Coast Guard, to demonstrate to the United States that, hey, you might not be able to boss us around the way you used to. And for China, Taiwan is a red line. Reunification is non-negotiable for Beijing, and this is going to be a key flashpoint in broader U.S. China competition for my lifetime. So, we're seeing this military modernization. We're seeing this pretty aggressive. Oh, hell, aggressive is an understatement. I mean, this is literally a military exercise simulating what they state that they eventually plan on doing. In response to this, the United States has strengthened its regional alliances with countries like Japan, South Korea, Australia, which just got some nuclear subs, and the Philippines. The U.S. also conducts its own military exercises, RIMPAC, which is the Rim of the Pacific. And like I said, it deploys these carrier strike groups to signal that it wants to maintain the rules-based international liberal order that benefits it. So deploying carrier strike groups like the Ronald Reagan, which just made a trip through the area, reinforces the message that Washington is still committed to countering any Chinese attempt to alter the status quo via force. But these exercises that China's undertaking do have implications going beyond Taiwan. Countries like Japan, Vietnam, the Philippines, which all are engaged in territorial disputes with China, are watching these developments in the U.S. response to see if the U.S. can still be a strong ally or whether China is going to be able to push the U.S. out of the Indo-Pacific security landscape. And the Quad, which is the quadrilateral security dialogue, which is made up of U.S., Japan, Australia, and India, is taking notice of China's growing assertiveness, its growing belligerence. And while it's not a formal military alliance, it is engaging in the types of balance of power politics that would counterbalance China in the region. And this is super critical because these types of exercises like Joint Sword 2024B tend to provoke fear in Taiwan and fear in the region more broadly. Taiwan has obviously condemned China's military drills. It's stated that they're provocative and irresponsible, an attempt to intimidate and destabilize the island. President Lai Ching-te has reiterated its commitment to continued defensive preparedness, asymmetric warfare, and anything it can do to counter China's larger and technologically superior forces till the United States can get troops over from Korea, Japan, and engage in the massive bloodbath and likely largest naval battle in modern history that will occur when China attacks Taiwan. Taiwan's Ministry of National Defense has deployed forces to monitor Chinese activities, notably these incursions with fighter jets and naval assets. But Taiwan isn't seeking to provoke. It's seeking to demonstrate its readiness, and its official policy is preparing for war, but not seeking war. But at the same time, Taiwan continues to call on the international community for greater support. Japan, in response, has shown a higher degree of vigilance, notably around the Senkaku Islands in the East China Sea, where it has territorial disputes with China. Japan has thus strengthened its defense cooperation with the U.S., notably in relation to anti-submarine warfare and ballistic missile defense systems. We have U.S. forces in Okinawa, which are just a few hundred miles from Taiwan. And, Japan's continued willingness to allow them to be based there demonstrates the importance of America in its plan for the region. If we look at the Philippines and other Southeast Asian nations, they've responded cautiously to Chinese belligerence, but they're very wary of this growing Chinese assertiveness. Manila, the Philippines, are very concerned about the militarization of the South China Sea because they have many competing claims with China over fisheries, over territory, etc. And because of this, the Philippines recently increased military cooperation with the U.S. through the EDCA, which is the Enhanced Defense Cooperation Agreement, which allows the U.S. to base more troops out of the region. Vietnam and Malaysia are also directly impacted because they have more territorial disputes with China and are impacted by the very, very aggressive maritime patrols and island building efforts that China engages in, often with non-military ships, to just mess with its neighbors and show kind of like, hey, we can do what we want. So the United States continues to strongly criticize these military drills, like Joint Sword here, because, it is what it is. This is a rehearsal of an invasion of Taiwan. And the Pentagon characterized it as a quote-unquote pressure operation, and the United States is right over there maintaining its freedom of navigation operations, but they don't really seem to be deterring the Chinese anymore. And this has significant global strategic implications, with the Indo-Pacific being the world's most important strategic theater, and with U.S. China competition likely to shape global politics for decades. China's willingness to challenge U.S. dominance in the region leads to significant risk of regional conflict. This has led European powers that don't have a dog in the fight, so to speak, like France and Germany, but who do benefit from the international rules-based order, to start recognizing the significance of the Indo-Pacific, and they've begun sending naval assets to the region in joint exercises with the U.S. and regional allies to basically signify their own commitment to this rules-based international order, which I'll talk about in another video, which benefits them. So from an economic point of view, these military tensions could have devastating impacts if ever Taiwan was invaded, because Taiwan is the world's leading manufacturer of semiconductors, which are critical for basically everything. Also critical for AI, mind you. GPUs, right? So many of them are manufactured in Taiwan, and if Taiwan was to fall, that would be a big problem. But at the end of the day, Joint Sword 2024B is history repeating itself. It doesn't have broad, unique significance, but it is an embodiment of Beijing's efforts to dominate Taiwan and expand its influence throughout the Indo-Pacific. It is showing that China is increasingly capable of engaging in multi-domain coordinated warfare because it can integrate naval, air, rocket, Coast Guard forces, ground forces, marine forces into single complex joint operations, which was not the case only a decade ago. When you combine this with China's rapidly growing naval power, notably the fact that it's building so many aircraft carriers, destroyers, and submarines, and despite the fact that it has very poor naval aviation compared to the United States and the Western great powers, the identification of Chinese military exercises is a growing reminder of how Chinese power so close to Taiwan is a significant threat to Taiwan and to the world order as it currently stands more globally. The U.S. is going to continue to oppose China's aggressive posturing, reinforcing its security commitment to Taiwan and such. The AUKUS, a UK-US alliance with Australia, enhanced cooperation with Japan and South Korea, are showing an American pivot towards the Pacific. But over time, if the U.S. is not capable of showing more resolve and more power projection in the region, it is very likely that we will see a decrease in American capability, a deserved one, as Beijing comes to dominate a region that America was able to project power in via its own carrier strike groups for so very long. I've dropped some pretty interesting books in the description if you're interested in reading more about this. Otherwise, please drop us a subscribe, a follow, a like, whatever it's called. Share this with a friend, an enemy, a frenemy, whomever you would like. It is currently 4:50 p.m. on the 14th of October here in Calgary, Alberta. Thank you so much for watching. Hope you have a wonderful, wonderful day.